Greetings again. This is Charles X. White, your host. The program is Community Views and Solutions. We're here with part 2 of this particular show, special 3-hour. Of course, you know we're going to cut it up and make it 10 hours. We have a recap clip from our last discussion with Professor Jim Blackburn from Rice University that we want to try to use as an introduction to this particular segment. Mark, do you have that clip?
Not yet, hang on.
Okay. So with me today, we have 2 distinguished professors from Sam Houston State University that we will introduce later, very shortly into the program. And the lineup is going to be, we're going to have a call-in section where if you want to call in and ask the professors or make a comment or question, we'll give you that phone number shortly. This is a series in how we are trying to communicate to the public information that is based on scientific research and fact. What we find in the community today is that when we get information from the government, it's skewed information. And it's selective information. And what we want to do and are doing at this moment is providing and collapsing that distance between fact-based information from a third party and the community, and we are bridging fact-based information and advocacy on the community's part. Just look at this clip from Professor Blackburn. I'll talk about it or elaborate a little bit on it after this clip. Joined by a serious research guy. Now, I met this guy some time ago, and we did a symposium in 2010 on flooding.
Yes, we did.
At Texas Southern University, School of Public Affairs. And here we are right now with what we talked about as a solution then. So I wanted to invite Jim Blackburn, who is a serious researcher. Did you bring him a book?
I did not. I did not get the message in time, but I will take care of you with the book.
Okay, because I want to buy the book.
I'll get it for you.
You'll take my money, I know.
I will do that.
Yeah, he is a lawyer, y'all.
You got to be careful with lawyers, you know. We'll take every dime we can get.
What's the book? It's his book.
I've written a book called A Texan Plan for the Texas Coast, and it's about dealing with Texas, which doesn't like to regulate, so it's using market forces to protect the important values of the Texas coast. And it's also an urge for citizens to become activists and become involved, because if you don't fight for something in Texas, you're going to lose it.
Well,
I think it's that simple.
Now, Jim is with the Speed Center.
That's correct, the Severe Storm Center at Rice.
And he's also with the Kinder. You do work for them?
No, I mean, we do work primarily for Houston Endowment, but we're part of a group that has been pulled together by Kinder, Houston Endowment, and the Mitchell Foundation, and they're getting a bunch of researchers that are working in Houston to come together to share information, to share data, and hopefully to help develop some decent plans. That we've got flooding that we can't control. And I honestly think we haven't done a lot of these things because we don't want to talk about living with water rather than controlling flooding. We're going to live with water. I mean, that's not going to change.
We're on the coast.
We're on the coast, but we get huge rainfalls.
Of course.
But I think the question is, what's the resilience?
If you notice, we're going to live with water, which means that we need to plan for water. And in one of Jim's additional comments he made, he said he thinks it's not enough planning. And what we want to do is introduce that type of thinking. So according to some people and politicians, they don't think community folk can do critical thinking. When in the university sector, they have a thing called service learning and experiential learning, and both of those deal with what have you learned in your lifespan, and you're trying to blend it to accelerate and enrich the critical thinking faculties. So there's a lot of critical thinking going on in the community, but one of the problems is we don't vote like it. I don't know why we keep putting these same people in here that's not, anyway, so it's a story for another time. Y'all know me about that now, come on. So the other part of what that discussion was about was flooding. Mark, we're gonna go to, I'm gonna introduce our guest, and then we're gonna go to that clip on flooding, because we don't wanna lose the core. We don't wanna lose the concept on Harvey. Harvey is a game changer. There were, in my opinion, 4 game changers and 3 other ones other than Harvey. One was crack cocaine in the 80s, 85, 86, depending on who you're talking to. 2001, the events at 9/11. And then you have 2005, which is Hurricane Katrina. And then you have Harvey. Harvey's impact, research and cost and all of that, is going to rewrite the record books in a lot of respects. Just like the events at 9/11 ushered in the National Incident Management System, the National Preparedness Framework, and a lot of other protocols to address man-made and natural disasters. The problem is it's a lot of stuff on paper, but it's not getting to the practical application inside the community. And primarily that's the job to actually implement deals with the city, or in some cases it was the county. But what we want to do now is embolden and inform and enrich the community. And our 2 professors today that's going to join in on the discussion in various ways from their point of view is, our first professor is Magdalena Denham. Did I say it right?
Yes.
I said it flat, but I did say it right. Okay. From Sam Houston State, and Natalie Baker from Sam Houston State. Now, in the background, you see something, the slide is talking about post-traumatic stress disorder. And in that vein, and when you add that picture I had with the elephant inside the boardroom, it's a lot of discussion that's not being advanced in a broad way. And we want to bring some of these professors and researchers in. So Magdalena, would you introduce yourself to the audience, and what is your field of research, and what you think and how you think a partnership with the community, and preferably with a high-value partnership with Charity Productions would, I had to put that commercial in there. Come on.
Thank you, Charlie. Hello. My name is Magdalena Denham. I'm an assistant professor at the Department of Security Studies at Sam Houston State University College of Criminal Justice. And we have a program that branched out of criminal justice in Homeland Security Studies, of which emergency management and disaster management is a huge part. So that's where our research is anchored. And I also am part of a Center for Community Engagement at Sam Houston State University, and our university is Carnegie designated as community engaged, and we just celebrated our 5th anniversary. So we are trying to put that EN in the engagement with the community in our service, our research, and our teaching.
Now, let me ask you this. So the topics and the theories are some of the things that you've heard me talk about. Am I off the grid on another planet, or am I in the ballpark?
You are in a ballpark.
That's all I need.
Charlie.
As long as I'm in the ballpark, I don't want to be on Venus when everybody else is at the park. Our next professor, and Magdalena was one of my professors, supervisor professors, I should say supervisor, because she comes in and out of the classroom when she gets ready. But I had to take 2 of my classes from Sam Houston State, and that was in 2006 or 7, and that's where we met, and we were talking, and she's real smart, and I try to associate myself with smart people. The next smart person we have is a professor, Professor Natalie Baker. Could you introduce yourself to the audience and something about your study and work?
Sure, yeah. I'm Natalie Baker. I'm with Magdalena, or Dr. Denham, at Sam Houston State in the Department of Security Studies. So I've done a good amount of research on disasters. I did some research projects on Hurricane Katrina and the response from community members, particularly those who work in mental health care. And then now with Harvey, Dr. Denham and I have received a National Science Foundation grant to study the after effects, actually the sort of broad experience of Hurricane Harvey from multiple perspectives, and really trying to critique the emergency management institutions, the institutions responsible for managing disasters that are letting the populace down. So that's what I do in a nutshell, among other things.
Well, what we want to do now is hold that point. Now we're going to tie all this into the community and conversations that need to be had, and phrases and disparities and equities. We're going to tie all that in. But Mark, do you have that clip from the core that we? Okay, why don't you play that? Because that's our focus piece on what we're talking about, just showing one aspect and the scope and the volume of Harvey. We're back. We're joined by Tracy Stevens, and y'all know Tracy is our retired mid-management guy. But what we're accenting is the professionals, the scholars, the practitioners. My title or category is practitioner. Tracy, and I guess it could be the community. All of us could be the community. But Tracy is a professional and a community person. And I wanted Tracy to kind of dovetail and recap or either add some information about that golf course that I mentioned the last time as part of the solution. And in this, the part about the Houston flood of 1935, and this is part of the conversation that I was encouraged by Jim Blackburn's comment by saying what conversation is not being had in the community, black, white, Asian, or whatever. But for the most part in the audience, the black community doesn't get 1/3 third of this conversation in a digestible manner or format. And Tracy helps break it down in a digestible way. So when we're talking to 50 to 500 people, he can make it real clear to them. But this is what was said. Now, this is from the Washington Post. The Addicks Barker dams were built 70 years ago at a cost of $4 million to protect the city from dangerous floods. Several years ago, they were rated by the Corps as among the nation's most compromised dams, according to the 2016 Houston Chronicle story. The Corps was spending $72 million to repair the dams, knowing that if they failed during a major storm, the consequences for downtown Houston would be catastrophic. Okay, I want to highlight downtown Houston because it acts like when the planning is done, the black community is an afterthought. And in Jim's description of the Addicks Barker Dam, he made a comment, just like the article is saying, it was to protect downtown, not the neighborhood.
Yeah.
And then you all had a discussion about the two different golf courses, and I brought up the one on Mesa. Kind of give us a little input on how that would help, because Northeast Houston, Homestead, City Gas, and Mesa, and all those other areas over there took a tremendous hit in the flooding, as you'll see on this other clip we have. But just give us in a solution component, is it viable as a solution to reduce the flooding in that northeast section of Houston?
Yeah, you have two actually golf courses on the northeast side that could help. You have the Brock Park Golf Course and Country Club,
Which is the one I was speaking of,
which is the
right?
one you were speaking of. That's the same one where Halls Bayou tributary comes into Greens Bayou. They fork right there at that park golf course. Okay, that, Halls Bayou drains all the way over through City Gas, Cashmere Garden, Trinity Garden, all the way over across 59 Lockwood by LBJ Hospital. All of that water and drainage goes into Greens Bayou, where it meets at the park.
So that's why geographically the park would be a consideration, like these other locations, as a detention pond or a part of the new mitigation plan in reducing the flooding?
Yes, because when you look at from when Allison hit, Allison hit that part of town, the northeast. It stayed practically on the northeast side of town.
So wait a minute. Which tropical storm?
Allison.
That's 2001. Somewhere in there.
Almost 20 years ago.
Almost 20 years ago. Now look. So are there any plans to improve that facility like what we're talking about now?
No. The only plans that I know is Greens Bayou got a project, but it's way up by Veteran Memorial, that area up there by the Beltway.
Okay.
Then the other project, is the Halls Bayou, which they constantly working on, which that's west of Lockwood, west of 610, down lower than LBJ Hospital. But when you cross the freeway, when you cross the freeway, there's nothing really, no projects that I know of or seen or heard of that's being proposed or worked on.
Okay. So we know of right now there are one or two projects being proposed to use the golf course as part of the mitigation plan. Is that correct or not correct?
Not correct. I don't think any of them are being considered to be used as detention or retention.
So at this point, from your professional view, we do have a possibility, because I'm trying to pick the next project with Texas A&M is what I'm doing,
Okay.
is for them to look at it in that vein as we try to craft a area plan for that part of the city.
Well, even that part of the city, if you look at the trail of Greens Bayou, the way it drains, it drains the northeast part of Houston.
Wait a minute, what kind of geography are we talking about?
We looking at everything basically from 59 freeway going back east.
59 North.
59 North Freeway going back east.
Now, how far south? Are we coming up to I-10?
Yeah, Greens Bayou starts below I-10.
Okay.
Greens Bayou, what drains Pleasantville, Clinton Park, Galena Park, Jacinto City, North Shore, Songwood, which flooded.
Big problem.
And you saw where I-10 freeway went underwater.
Correct.
That's Greens Bayou. All of that. And so Greens Bayou should have been looked at before Allison and especially after Allison. But like I say, it's plenty options and it's plenty room and green space along Greens Bayou that could be used to mitigate a bunch of that flooding and potentially stop, because, you know, we lost a hospital, North Shore Hospital, right there at Greens Bayou and I-10 is not going to be reopened.
It's not.
It's not.
Now, Dr. Baker, we're going to come to you now. That slide we have talked about disaster capitalism. You'll be able to kind of give us a little flush out some conversation on that one, won't you?
Yes, definitely.
Okay. So we see here we have a practical solution in a mitigating format. And if our time of span is 1935 to now, and we have city fathers and council members and the Army Corps of Engineers, if we try to craft a mitigation plan that includes that particular golf course from a professional standpoint, it's doable. We see that part.
And it's 2 golf courses.
And it's 2 golf courses that would relieve a lot of that flooding. Now, because, you know, the taboo subject matters, with the elephant in the room, I just want to keep reflecting on that as far as not having that conversation in the public domain, particularly with the community members giving solution input, okay? Because sometimes the policy drives the dollars, and sometimes the dollars drive the policy. And since we've already confirmed, you know, by the professor over here, that I'm in the ballpark, and see, in the previous interview, it's not either or. I'm not coming from that, okay? What I'm saying is it's and both. Let's figure how we get the best fit for the best dollar to save the most people and reduce the most, you know, loss of life and property. That's our basic tenets, right? Reducing the loss of life and property, right? Yep. Okay, so here we have a professional with his view. I wanted to add your comment to the conversation from the last interview we did with Professor Blackburn, because the black community is really left out of the conversation. And I don't mind telling you, it's our elected officials that's leaving us out the question. Now, y'all know, you know, don't get me started, because y'all know that I'm more right than wrong. I'm not 100% right, and I'm not perfect, and I'm not trying to be. I'm not trying to condemn this one or that one. I'm trying to fix it for the people. Y'all got the money. Y'all write the policy. Let's fix this. Tracy, you have any closing comments on that particular? Anything else about the flooding aspect and the black community?
The only thing I can say is that the northeast side of Houston, the east side of Houston, and the southeast side of Houston. I worked Allison as an employee as a first responder. I was a first responder until I retired with the city. And there are options. There have been studies done, millions of dollars, but we keep paying millions and millions of dollars for studies and studies, and they're put on the shelf. They're not made into projects. And a lot of times is that, okay, now we see that the west side flooded, okay, 2 times, 3 times here in the last 10 years.
3.
In the last 10 years.
Okay.
But, okay, the northeast side and the east side and the southeast have been flooding for decades.
Yeah.
Okay, and the south for decades and decades and decades. Okay, so now all of a sudden you want to start spending a bunch of money starting over there, and you never spend any money over here. Now, North Shore Hospital is going to close. It's been flooded, I know, at least 3 times. Now they're not going to rebuild it. They're not going to go back into the building. All of that along Maxey Road, Songwood, Federal Road, Normandy. You go up Greens Bayou up to Tidwell, Homestead, City Gas, Scenic Wood. You come on down to like Pleasantville, Clinton Park area. All of that's been flooding for years before these last 3 incidents we had.
Correct.
But you never heard them talking about the money and what they want to do over there, like they talking about what they want to do now. And the killing thing about it is that you have more options and green space on the northeast side and the east side than you do out west.
Correct.
It's not built upon where there's no room to expand or to build detentions or retentions. The options are there without doing a bunch of buyouts or demoing like they talking about would have to be done to the west side.
Well, hey, Mark, do you have that Army Corps?
I just rolled it. I already showed it.
Okay, what about the other one with the debris?
Give me a second.
Okay. Now, I just want to recap before we go to the clip. And thank you for showing up for that graphic conversation that you just gave us and gave the audience. If you had to, in a perfect world, and you could do everything that you would want to do as fixing and reducing the flooding problem, how long would it take to construct a meaningful detention, retention, using those 2 golf courses, reduce the flooding in that quadrant? How long would the project take? 1 year, 5 years?
It wouldn't take 10 years.
It wouldn't take 10.
It wouldn't take 10, depending on how much water they wanted to detain for runoff between the 2 bayous right there at that one bayou, Brock Park Country Club. Because Greens coming there, Halls Bayou coming there. Then downstream from that, you have Texaco Country Club, which really isn't used that much from last I recall, which would be another area. Then a lot of times you can look at some of the problems is that when the water system snakes, it slows the water down from getting out. But there are areas along Greens Bayou that could be straightened out because we have the space to increase the flow and the capacity because we have room.
So when Jim said and spoke about the city building larger capacities of pipes, but when it gets to the very end, it's a smaller capacity of pipe. When you say you have the green space or the space to straighten that snake out, or pathway for the water flow, so would you are including the same upsize of the pipe all the way to the runoff valve location?
Well, Greens Bayou wouldn't need any because if I'm not mistaken, we lost the Wood Forest Bridge that goes over Greens Bayou in this last one, which is on the east side too, that you didn't hear much about. Okay, but when me and Mr. Blackburn was talking about the capacity, remember we say you never start up. They started on the opposite end of where the water go. Remember I gave the two sink scenario for Braves Bayou?
Right.
Most of their detention projects started way out west on the other side of the Beltway, out towards Highway 6. Now they increased all of that capacity out there, tried to slow the water down, but when they got around to Maryland, it bottlenecks because they haven't completed everything from U of H to Buffalo Bayou. They just completed a section by McGregor Park. So you start downstream when you do drainage, you don't start upstream. But that's what they did.
And that was much money and not much solution long term.
Long term. Then that's why we talked about the Brayburn Country Club as being the best option to relieve all of that Maryland area from flooding.
So
but nobody want to talk about buying it.
So one solution would be applicable to two parts of town.
Yes.
Well, we want to thank you for visiting with us today. Mark, you had that clip?
Yes.
Okay, could you run that? We want you to just see some of this footage on the debris that was in your neighborhood. Okay. That's a very profound visual aid there, and it brings to my mind how this particular disaster with Harvey, a lot of the media played up how people responded to people. Now, in some conversations, that's called social capital. I try to phrase it as infrastructure social capital. Some people refer to it as community capital because it's a collection of impulse responses to humanity. Humanity has been responding in that way a lot. And in my mind, it's that special connectiveness that human beings have to human beings. And I think because it's such a money-driven process, the city and all of those people lose that concept because there are a lot of programs designed to infuse the community as part of the solution, but they are always minimized. Dr. Baker, what is it about the human aspect that you can chime in? Now, you saw that slide where I talked about disaster capitalism. You know, a lot of this is waste, but what's your spin on it?
Well, there's a lot going on here. So during Harvey, you saw, let's talk about the media sort of treatment of what happened during Harvey, and we can compare it to what happened, say, during Katrina, right? In Harvey, you see this focus on what they call like the Cajun Navy or whatever, this collective group of people coming together and helping one another out as a sort of unusual thing in disaster situations when it's actually not. Scholars have been documenting this sort of like pro-social community action situation in disasters since the 60s. And it happened during Katrina and it happened during 9/11, but those narratives aren't discussed in the media because the media has a specific, frames in which they like to talk about human behavior and in this instance, disaster. So if you remember back to Katrina, you saw a lot of chaos, right? Social chaos, looting. They refer to it as kind of like a war zone. Now with Harvey, you see a different situation. You see people coming together and helping. And why is that? Is it that Houston is different than New Orleans? Is it that Harvey was different than Katrina? No, it's not actually, because the looting or whatever during Katrina didn't really happen to the extent to which it was
played up.
Absolutely. So we know this in disaster scholarship. It's called disaster mythology. The media doesn't seem to know this, and the populace doesn't seem to know this. And so,
disaster mythology,
yeah.
What is that?
Well, these ideas of what happens during disaster, right? Like looting, or that's one of the bigger ones. Or people just kind of panic and freeze and don't do anything, and they need the institutions to come and help them. They can't help themselves, or they're threatening, right?
Yes.
And in particular, groups of people are presented as threatening, and we all know what
uncivilized,
unmanageable, barbaric,
all of
criminal.
That. And that's black people in most parts. Yes. What happens in the media? There's a lot of media. Now, Doc, in that regard, let me try to bring you into the conversation dealing with criminal justice and public policy and that kind of thing. How do you? Because I want to start this dialogue between us on this matter, between what you're saying. What's your spin on that?
Well, one thing that comes to mind for me is the treatment of those affected populations as victims and the government role, from a very, very centric perspective, coming as a savior to the victims, where in reality, those are in Harvey that was demonstrated very clearly that the emergency responders were affected as much as the other neighbor who, the degree of separation between one person affected and another was the elevation of a house in a community, for example. So we we rely on providing that government-centric service and sort of, it's prefabricated for the community, where in reality there is a very strong mechanisms within the community of those pro-social behaviors that Dr. Baker mentioned, of a very huge positive response to disasters. And I don't think we are capturing that, because a lot of times that community is not part of a discussion on those emergency management structures. You talked about the National Incident Management System and Incident Command, and average citizen does not know Incident Command, and yet they're able to swarm and form and spontaneously come in those events and figure out what functions need to be fulfilled, a lot of times without much of a prior training or checklists. And I think we have seen that very clearly in Harvey.
Now, okay, go ahead.
Yeah, I wanted to add, so I did some research on this, and this idea that the emergency management system is the savior, right, and that the populace is helpless, is kind of a double-edged sword. That permits this idea of preparedness to come into play, and this reliance on this idea, if we go into the community and we tell people how to prepare, and if they prepare in the ways that we want them to, then they'll survive a disaster. And that's completely false. A lot of times, especially if you're dealing with vulnerable, we want to call them vulnerable communities, they don't have resources to, collect water, to collect bread. They wouldn't. It's not going to work anyway. And so the management system absolves themselves of responsibility. And another thing goes on where if the public is not behaving in the way that they're supposed to, i.e., they're doing this emergent response, they're considered threatening, and are potential safety issues in terms of they're going to go out and loot, or if they're not going to stay in a shelter, what's going to happen? Where are they going to go? This idea of chaos is sort of placed on the people who are most subject to the worst parts of disaster.
Well, now, in this category that I've configured, scholars, professionals, practitioners, and community. As a practitioner, in what you said, the narrative of the government being the savior, they create the problem and then try to show themselves as the solution you don't need. Now, let me give you what the National Incident Management System, in my view, is the best tool that I've ever seen, if used properly. Okay? Everything has its, if. Now, in 2003, when it came out as a response to 9/11 and the man-made and natural disasters, there's a priority called National Priority 4.8. Now, I'm paraphrasing. Now, this is Tom Ridge and George Bush. Tom Ridge comment in 2003 about National Priority 4.8 says, paraphrasing, that we don't have enough manpower with the government to address these man-made or natural disasters. We don't. He said, look, the only common sense thing that we need to strengthen the capabilities of the citizens by training and infusing them when a catastrophic event happens, terrorist attack, he included, okay?
Of course.
Now, then in the government's rollout of that, here's Citizens Corps, Citizens Emergency Response Teams, CERT. They don't work in the black community.
Of course not.
Okay? Now, they didn't want them to work. I'm telling you what happened in Harris County. And anybody in Harris County want to, I got people that we got witnesses about what did and didn't happen with CERT and all of that. I even went to Washington about it. Y'all know what I'm talking about. Now, so you want us vulnerable.
Right.
You want to label us. You do label us as vulnerable, hard to serve, at risk, high risk. But it's a difference in poor service. We don't want to talk about the government poor service aspect. The government doesn't want to admit that it's not in the customer service business.
You're absolutely correct. And the thing that makes me upset about that as a scholar, but also as a human being, is that we can invest a ton of money in other priorities, particularly, you mentioned terrorism, counterterrorism, but neglect what happens at home. Instead, the government says, well, let's go and strengthen the citizenry, let's train them. But that they're skirting the issue. And what you're alluding to is the issue is that it's the inequity that the government is perpetuating.
Correct.
And if that inequity is not addressed, then we're going to continue to see these things happen over and over
That
and over
is
again.
exactly right. Now,
And that's, Charlie, leads us to this concept of, watershed moments in emergency management, and Harvey being one of those that I think will get us out of that. Now, I believe in preparedness and planning, but I think also that programs like Make the Kid and Be Prepared, they, as Dr. Baker mentioned, they abdicate the responsibility to look at the mitigation. And I think if we get anything out of Harvey, this is going to be that event, that focusing event, where we finally step back and think about mitigation. People can only prepare for that much. I mean, how much water can you possibly store for an event like Harvey?
It doesn't always make a difference.
Yes, and the communities, when you talk about communities are much more nuanced than, dividing them into the mandatory evacuations versus recommended evacuations. There's a lot more social community
we got a
factors
guy.
to
We
those.
got a guy in Houston called. His name is Bill King. He made a presentation and said we don't have enough highway to do the evacuation.
Absolutely.
I mean, so there's a lot of scientific data to say that mitigation should be, I call it the mitigation is the back door to recovery, and recovery is the front door to mitigation.
Absolutely.
Now, that was a congressman. I can't think of his name right now, but he did a study. And the study, and you can find it on the internet, and you type in $1 spent in mitigation is $4 saved in cost.
Yes. Mitigation, I think, is the answer, and it's not just mitigation, it's equitable mitigation. It has to be that way.
Ooh, equitable mitigation.
Because again, if it is not equitable, then we're going to see this over and over again. It's never going to stop.
Now, in Ike, I think that's the one where it was a lot of trees down in Houston.
Right.
You couldn't get in and you couldn't get out. Now, that night, Congressman Green, Reverend Nash, and I drove Sunnyside and South Park. We found 5 churches open. After that event, I went to the county to tell them that we need to create a list of all of the locations that were open. At that time, I don't know what they're doing now, they didn't want to hear that. And my point was, it's better to know where they are than to not know where they are. Now, it's always a political thing about who opens shelters by the definition, the Red Cross, the state, the da-da-da. It's all that's going on, public. It's a lot of stuff going on that's out of your purview that makes something not work, non-functional. What we are trying to do is collapse that gap with information, strategies, and scientific research, and put it in your hands so you can implement it. Now they have this other guy, Fugate. I went to a meeting in Washington. There was a national meeting with African American leadership and emergency management. They wanted to know how to, it's about 200 of us there. And they rolled out this program called Whole Community. They know the community's value, but they don't activate the value with the principles that's already existing that will work. Duh?
You know, I think that the important thing when you think about universities and community engagement is the way we have been looking at the community is not reciprocal. You know what I mean?
Right.
It's,
Absolutely.
you know, the researchers or organizations or, you know, Red Cross, FEMA, United Way, they're all wonderful organizations. They come to the community with a service. A lot of times that service is already pre-planned, packaged, ready to be delivered for risk reduction programs and things like that. But for the process to work, it has to be reciprocal. It means, you know, that community has
What's
to
in
be
it for
part,
me?
The community has to be part of actually creating those programs at the community level, you know, not in Washington or not in Emmitsburg.
Only because really the government sort of absolved themselves of any responsibility and put that on the burden on the community when the communities in general, communities that are vulnerable to disaster already have enough burden.
Well, and when you're talking about the resources, because you know there's always the question of resources, the universities, you know, their mission is, their first mission, you know, of course their mission is education, but it's also the creation of public good. And those universities are within those communities. So we have a tremendous resource in a lot of communities, which is a local institution of higher education or educational institution. That's where that research comes in, and it has to be a co-constructed research.
What kind of co-construction?
Co-constructed research.
Created
Now, that's-
together.
that's a-
Created together.
That's
Like
right.
truly together,
Reciprocal,
not
right.
not
Not on paper for the grant.
or like, here, give me this information, I'm just gonna run and take that and get tenure with that. You know, it's we're talking about true.
Let me give you this story, and I'm gonna call a couple of names. In that I can remember. In 1990, I sent a letter to all the presidents in the Houston area of university presidents to ask them to participate in a university collaborative. The vice president or provost from Rice showed up, is Roland Smith. The vice provost from UT Health Science Center, I can't think of his name. The president of Houston Community College, a representative from University of Houston, Jim Anderson, and a representative from Texas Southern. So I'm just me. So we called a meeting. The HCC hosted it, Central, Dr. Jack Daniels, not related to the whiskey. That's his name, Jack Daniels. So in my opening remarks, I told him, I said, I did not know Roland. I did not know anybody else. Okay, so I knew Jim Anderson and I knew Jack Daniels. Yes, I did used to drink George Liquor, which is the match for Jack Daniels. Right. But anyway, that's another story.
I was gonna say, how well do you know Jack
I
Daniels?
used to be a whiskey salesman. You know, anyway, that's another story, another life. But anyway, so the first thing I said was, I don't trust none of y'all. And I said, because y'all steal. I mean, it was like, and the guy from University of Texas Health Science Center, he was like insulted. Now, I wasn't trying to insult the guy. I was just telling him. But Roland, the professor, put it in a way that included examples and plagiarism. And once he explained it in that vernacular, that way, the guy was all right. He understood. We had a good time. Yeah. Well, we communicated, in other words. So I'm saying that to say that when the government is out of the equation as a divider, the potential for university and community collaboratives is tremendous.
Yes, and that is, again, because the government, as much as they, so broadly speaking government, right?
Right.
There's all different levels. It's a huge beast, and it's especially complicated in these days. But we have to operate as if they aren't there.
Right.
Because, pretty much they aren't. And I mean, it depends on how you view the role of the government. If you view that the role of the government is to protect its populace and to ensure that, that we are all treated as equal and we all have equal opportunity as they tend to espouse, then they should be there, right? They have funds dedicated to disaster response. They have, roles that they're supposed to fill. And a lot of times when we have these very large disasters, we don't see this happening. And it might work for small disasters. So NIMS and all that is probably really good for small disasters, and I think that's been demonstrated. However, on a large scale, what these situations like Harvey, what 9/11, what Katrina demonstrate is the social ills that exist already. Those are exacerbated in disaster. They're made worse. And again, is the populace and the university those people who are supposed to address these social ills in the absence of the government? I mean, I think that's what we have to come to terms with.
So in your research, can you give the audience an idea of some of the statistical framework?
I'm not a statistics person, so I do more what they call qualitative research, which is less numbers, more
quantitative versus qualitative.
Qualitative, yeah.
All right. So in restating the question,
Sure.
what are some of the disparities that you can point to that the audience would say, I can see that?
Well, money is a big one. Socioeconomic status is one of the biggest vulnerabilities, and of course that's intimately connected to race. So those can't be separated. The people who suffer most during disaster are those who are poor, Black, elderly. That tends to be the kind of hit list for disasters.
Now, from your qualitative standpoint, what would be a wish list fix that you could design that would have a beginning, middle, and then an end evaluation and a continuous for sustainability? What would that sound like? Or what would it look like?
That's a huge burden to put on me.
Right, well, we know you can handle it.
I can handle it, but I don't know if it's...
Yeah.
It's bigger than just one solution. It really is, the issue of disaster is a societal issue. It's a problem with our society. It isn't that we can go in and hand out pamphlets to people and say, this is how you should prepare for disasters and this is what you should do. We have to fix our failing infrastructures. We have to fix our poverty. We have to fix our inequity. That is the solution. So how do we fix that? We have to realize that we're on our own, and those of us of like mind need to come together and work on it together and take it as our responsibility. The responsibility of the university, the responsibility of academics who understand the issues. I mean, I don't have a solution. But preparedness is not it. It's what I'm saying is equitable mitigation, which is
That's
not.
one component. Let's just frame that one. Equitable mitigation is
Yeah.
one. Okay. Now, I'm going to give you this. No, go ahead on before I give you a scenario.
No, I mean, obviously, we are in the business of education, so we can do that through education. You know, reaching those areas that we have identified as, you know, requiring, you know, more inclusion. And creating awareness about that in communities. I mean, you know, in our college, we have tremendous resources. Let's say we have environmental studies that we have great projects going on building community gardens, you know, when you are talking about food security and involving the local community in those, involving our students in those. You know, you talked about the elephant in the room. I'll tell you, you know, the only way you eat an elephant is, you know, one piece at a time.
Right.
So for us in educational institutions is, you know, it's education for the community and with the community. And, you know, do we do workshops? Do we do conferences? Do we invite the elderly of the community to our colleges? You know, those types of initiatives. And I mentioned reciprocal, and what I meant by reciprocal was that we don't go and do a survey in a community to diagnose what that community might need, and then it gets published in a, you know, very high-tier journal, and the community still doesn't know what the solutions were, because it often how this translates.
We need a vehicle. You are one part of it, and which is what we see Charity Productions is part of that vehicle that goes and distributes, trains, engage. Service learning and experiential learning, in a sense, when you get the community collective together, you have institutional knowledge, a community of institutional knowledge.
Which is valuable.
Okay? Now, in some discussions that I have, I talk about the most bastardized word that's used in politics is community. Because the question is, which community are you talking
Absolutely.
about? What community are you talking about?
What does community mean?
What does it mean? Because I distill some of what's inferred with the word community and drop it down to neighborhood. See, strong neighborhood means strong community. Strong community means that. Or some people distill it down. Another one say strong family means strong neighborhood. Strong neighborhood means this. Now, from an academic standpoint, I'm going to give you this scenario because the problem, as both have said, is compounded, it's complex. It's not going to be done overnight in all of those scenarios, but the reality is it needs to be a start. Mm-hmm. And I was fortunate enough to be at a meeting and was exposed maybe a year ago. The concept been around a long time. Anchor institutions.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Anchor institutions, from what I understood, was a partnership between a university and a medical facility that would combine in their understanding and resources to do outreach and projects in a community because they saw the weaknesses in what government was doing, okay, in a short remembrance of that. Now, so what I want to do is to give you this scenario, and to me it's real. Educators decided to take out vocational ed going back to the 70s out of high school. Free skills building opportunities. Right now, the crafts are in high demand. Educators decided that. How can we recover that economic piece, because the two things that I read, two features you got to have working together, is education and economics. One feeds the other. How can we, knowing that we have the millennials in the front of us, what is it that we can do now as a process to create a baseline fix that the millennials will not be victimized by those kinds of decisions from an academic standpoint?
You know, I can touch up on two things that I think are might be promising. One is, if you are aware, in Texas we have that 2060 plan, Texas 2060 education plan, that is talking about identifying marketable skills across different curricular areas. You know, with disaster management specifically, I think that that's an opportunity because as we are looking at, you know, more and more interdisciplinary studies, we could identify those core competencies that are required and relate them to the market. And let's say, you know, you need more scientists in mitigation, or you need more meteorologists, or, you know, you identify what those core skills are going to be needed and competencies, and you develop a curriculum to those. And I think we are going in that direction in Texas because of, you know, the amount of debt students have and the amount of time it takes for them to find jobs. And we that's another thing where we can't, you know, student loan ourselves into this next generation. And so hopefully that's one strategy. The other one is, I'll give you an example of Sam Houston State University actually going and looking at curriculum development, requested the community input. And we just started it, we started a minor in community leadership. We actually asked people in the community who collaborated with the professors what they needed in graduates that were graduating from sociology programs and psychology programs and stuff like that. And a lot of competencies that were mentioned was, you know, decision making and leadership and ethical decision making and things like that. And then, you know, those concepts helped develop a minor. And we just started that minor, and I'll tell you that the first group of students that took the very first class in the fall was actually at Greenspoint Mall shelter, and they were helping within their class. That first class that they had, they were helping in shelter operations. So I think initiatives like that should be supported. And it's a good example on, you know, this is a community leadership minor, but you can replicate it across, you know, all different colleges, you know, in health and environmental studies. And so what you are offering to students is driven by market, is driven by the need, because it comes from, you know, from the field.
Okay, now you stirred up a lot right there. Will education, I used to be a spokesperson for this program in education called Texas Stars. I don't know if you remember that. And it was a system where if you took certain courses on your completion of school, high school, on the completion of high school, that you would like get extra marks when an employer looked at your transcript from high school. So how do we create, from that question for what you were talking about, 2060, I see that as the new version of what I was back in the 90s. How do we get a program that works, that all we have to do is remix, retool it a little bit, but it's still the same thing because it works? It seems like politicians and education gets into this 5-year cycle, 3-year cycle, and then they need a new lexicon to go with whatever it is because of a focus group said these are word triggers now, not then. And so how do we get to a fixed point? Because, you know, in education, this is not absolute. But I think, as far as I can remember, that the system that was used for a long time was the Iowa testing system, okay, in Texas. So then you got tax, TOS, you got this, you got that, teaching to the test, this, that. But for a long time, it was one system. And my 5th grade teacher told me, as I was grown, she said, when we taught you all, we taught you content and subject matter that when you took a test, you could pass it. You didn't have to we didn't have to teach you to the test. We taught you content. That's the kind of sustainability, because we've had such a rocky road in education and slogans and theories. You know, all these multiple theories. For me, when I learned about multiple intelligence, I was saying we can throw everything else away and just use multiple intelligence as the primary, and then we graduate from there based on that. I mean, I'm not an educator, I'm a practitioner, but the point is, what would you say about that short life cycle, and how would we make the transition from cycles to sustainability?
Well, you know, first of all, I think that standardized testing kills education.
Yes,
that
definitely.
is, you know, my educator.
You heard it first. You heard it first.
I agree.
And, you know, I think it's about competencies, and it goes back again to, you know, there's always going to be fads, and there's always going to be catchphrases. And I think that brings us back to the institution and research, and the research being socially responsive and responsible, and, you know, that we do evaluate those policies as we implement them, you know, and we evaluate them cyclically and see if they work or not. You know, it's one of those big social issues. I think it's you know, really, really difficult to address. As far as, you know, experiential learning and, you know, the products of multiple choice tests, I think that education of students with the community supports social learning theories, supports, you know, those, there have been theories around for, you know, 50 years or 60 years, you know, take Vygotsky or whatever.
Well,
those are,
all of that works if you have, you know, a decent learning environment. If you don't have a decent learning environment, then the learning is not really going to happen in the way that it's intended to, right? So the first thing to do is to stop turning schools into prisons.
Oh.
The second thing to do is stop relying on standardized testing, because we're not teaching those children who have opportunity, we're not teaching them how to think critically and to write and to do the basic things that you need in order to advance in this world and get a job.
You got a call.
I mean, again, the issues, and this is just me, I'm always going to come back to it, the issue is systemic. So if we can barely make our educational system work for most kids, I mean, we see this coming into the university where, you know.
Well, let's see who this caller.
Hello.
Hello, caller.
Yes.
How you doing?
I'm fine.
You have a question or observation for us?
I do have a question and maybe a bit of an observation, but my question is, how do you respond? How would parents respond to the idea that the Texas Education Agency is thinking about, or has made kind of an accusation that those school districts that don't want to really give the the yearly test to students because funding may be in question by the federal government. And I'm kind of worried about that because I know that the students are suffering from some emotional problems due to Harvey. The school district HISD started school late, and that all of that has an effect upon students and teachers. So how do you test these kids on all of the testing that goes on for promotion and graduation, knowing that these children have suffered through this horrific storm, and then have the staff think about decreased funding? What is the answer to that? I mean, how are they to respond to that? What are they to do? Do you have some advice for me?
I'm going to let y'all handle that one.
My expertise is not in education, but I do have a child myself, and we were affected by the hurricane as well. The problem is, again, I'm going to pin it back onto the educational system where you need to be, the schools need to be flexible in that the kind of the rules that apply in a normal situation go out the window in a situation like a disaster, and maybe more of a focus on, let's see where our children are at in terms of their mental health. Let's see where they're at in how they're doing, because you can't expect them to learn in a meaningful way if they're dealing with such a disruptive situation, an ongoing disruptive situation that is still happening. How can you expect them to adhere to these standardized tests? There needs to be flexibility in the system. And it's really hard for parents to deal with because, I mean, for example, my child is in school. She started late. We moved here from a different city, and so that's an issue to deal with already. And you know, she's not doing well in school because of all these issues, and there's no flexibility whatsoever in that.
And that's perhaps this is why we're having this conversation, is because we are on the eve of an event, and that's a time now to take it as an opportunity to be thinking about those issues. We've had school closures because of disasters. Periodically we have them in Texas and other states, and maybe it's coming to the point where we need to start talking policy for schools and continuity of operations in disasters. At the elementary K-12 level, that's a conversation. That was a conversation for us at the university level. We had to, we have some students who are emergency responders who work 12-hour shifts, and we had to be flexible in redesigning courses, in moving dates to drop classes, add classes. It was a brand new territory for us, for the university. Decisions were made, and of course, the need had to trump bureaucracy. The systems had to be flexible. That's going to be really relying on leadership, but universities are privileged to where they are decentralized in a way that they can do their own decisions, whereas the K-12 education would have to look at their model of operating. But that's definitely, it's an excellent question and a very valid concern. And I think, again, here we are at that point of, how do we mitigate in the future, how we take those factors into account.
Well, we have to deal with it now. What are we going to do now?
But let me ask you this. Carla, are you still there?
Yes, I'm here.
Do you have a
listening.
pencil?
Yes, I have a pen.
A pencil pen. Okay.
I'm ready. Mm-hmm.
The Texas Education Agency has a code. It's chapter 26 in the Texas Education Agency's code, and it's called Parents' Rights and Responsibilities. So number one, I would ask you to look at that and review that particular chapter.
Okay.
And in that chapter, there are some things that you can request of the school district. If it's a mental health assessment or whatever type of an assessment, it comes under that particular chapter, chapter 26.
26.
Okay?
Okay.
Now, a person that you can call in the complaint department, and it's really downsized from what it was years ago, is McKnight, Mr. McKnight. So if you call...
Is that a Mr.?
McKnight, yes.
All right. Is that a Mr. McKnight?
Yes. If you call him and ask him, tell him that I told you to call him, which it's not gonna hurt. It's not gonna get you, a gold key or nothing. But he's the guy that I refer parents to, so that they can walk through the Texas Education Code, so that you can cite the code that tell the people at the district, this is what you want, and this is your authorization for asking for it. Because you have to have an authorization from the state for them to act. And if they figure that you don't know it, it's because you don't ask for it, okay?
Okay.
So that would be one, because what you're saying is these students and parents need a particular service, and they are trying to figure out how to access that particular service. And this is if I'm understanding you correctly, this would be my recommendation for that particular process, for you to start that process.
Mm-hmm. Well, I understand what you're saying, and I appreciate the information very much. I'm not looking at it as a parent per se, but I am concerned about schools as a whole, because the Texas Education Agency are the principal factors in my question, because they are telling school districts what they should do and must do in terms of test giving and taking. Some schools want to do the testing, but not necessarily count it as a valid check for them.
Well, look, let me say this. Take my number, 713-292-3436. Mark, we're gonna need that clip again from the Army Corps.
713-292-3436.
Yes, 36. And let me see if I can refer you. Let me see if I can maybe refer you to another possible way. But let me in what you said.
Thank you so much.
Okay. Now,
right.
because she mentioned something about the Texas Education Agency, Houston Independent School District, HISD, according to their website, to show you how confounded this problem is, 72.6% of their budget comes from property taxes.
Mm-hmm.
22% comes from the state.
Exactly. Yes.
And 4%, to some percentage degree, comes from the federal government. You don't have to be a parent to have a right to put forth questions because you're a taxpayer. Doesn't mean, because I've been in school districts all across the state, and it's universal. They'll tell you one of the first questions they'll ask you is, do you have a child in the district? That's just a disclaimer to push you in a corner.
Okay.
So I'm giving you a response because if you or one of your friends get that type of aggression, your response is it doesn't matter, because we have firemen, for an example, and superintendents that have never been living in the state before they got the job, so that doesn't matter. We have firemen and policemen that don't live in the city of Houston. That doesn't matter. But you paying 72.6% in property taxes does matter. Okay? So from that standpoint, what I want you to do is be encouraged and emboldened, and whatever information I can share with you in that regard that's fact-based and, logic, at least you'll have something to fight with from that standpoint. Now, but so thank you for your call. We're going to see if we have another caller, but we're going to run this clip from the Army Corps of Engineers. Are you ready, Mark?
Yes.
Okay, run that clip for us right now. No. Odette.
Yes.
We're back. How you doing? We have another subject matter expert with us at the time, and you might be surprised who I'm speaking of once I ask the question. But we're talking a lot about a lot of things, and we thought it would be interesting to hear a 1, 2, 3 response from a young person as a victim and have experienced, let me say, the impact of Hurricane Harvey. We have with us Odette Baker. How you doing, Miss Odette Baker?
Well,
Wait a minute, how are you doing?
I'm really good.
Okay, now wait a minute, look at me, I'm over here. Thank you very much. Now, you are how old?
I am 8 years old. I'm about to turn 9 in December 2nd.
Okay. You went through Hurricane Harvey, right? The storm.
Yes.
All right. Now, as an 8-year-old about to be 9,
Yes.
and to all of the parents and the 8-year-old and the 9-year-olds that's looking at you right now, no,
Yes.
look at me because they can't see you right now.
I know.
I mean, they see you, but they don't see you, but okay. You good? You comfortable?
Yeah.
All right, I'm glad you're smiling. You have a nice smile.
Thank you.
Now, I want you to think about this, and I want you to give me your best response to how would you recommend to other 8-year-olds and preteens and parents, just relate your experience, and do you have any recommendations for us?
Yes, I actually do. Hurricane Harvey was a really scary, but I actually didn't. I'm grateful that my house didn't get destroyed, and I'm really sad. Like, I'd rather have my house destroyed and my family rescued than me in the, like, I would risk my life for 8-year-olds, preteens, and adults, and my family for safety.
So safety is priority for you during the form of a storm, right?
Yes.
Now, did any of your friends experience flooding?
No, well, actually, yes. I think Peyton did, but I'm not very sure. I have to ask her. Well, one of my teachers at my school I know had a flooded house in Hurricane Harvey. Yeah.
And so now when y'all were at school and the students were talking, now this is my little wrap-up question for you, okay? We're glad you're here.
Thank you.
And you're giving us some good insight. And you're how old?
I'm 8.
Going on,
What?
you're 8, about to be what?
9.
Okay, not 10.
Not
You're not skipping 9, right?
no.
Okay. So this is my closing question to you,
Yeah.
because I'm glad you're here as a subject matter expert. I heard you would have your PhD by the time you were 22. That's okay. Let's move on to the question. You're a good interviewer. Now, your friends,
Yes.
what kind of discussion did you and your friends have once you got back together at school about the hurricane?
Well, we said that it was a very, 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 very scary, like, adjustment to the world, and I literally thought that I would never actually get in a hurricane, but it happened.
Well, we're going to say thank you, and we know you are going to be back in the control room. So thank you for your comments, and we'll look up and see if we can pull you back and have a preteen discussion with you and several other teens, and let's get it from the teens' perspective and the preteen perspective as to how the hurricane impacted you. Thank you, and they're calling for you in the control room.
Yeah, I know.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you too.
Okay, now to the point of the caller about parents needing to get services, this statement from Odette is very reinforcing to that particular caller's interest.
Yes.
So again, to the audience, I can't think of the number right now, but the person is, you have 2 people, Jose and McKnight. If you call the Texas Education Agency in Austin and ask for the complaint division, if you forget their names, and tell them that I told you to call, and tell them the specific service. If you need psychological testing, ask them for the authorization in the Texas Education Code that would allow you to present that to the school district so that you can get that particular service. The chapter is chapter 26, Parental Rights and Responsibilities. And there are terms in it on what the district must and shall do or provide. Those are directives. It's different from may. When you see the word may, it's optional. But when you see the word shall and must and will, those are directives. So we want to say thank you to the caller. Now, this is 2 documents that were co-produced by Texas A&M and Charity Productions. This is also a document that I'm trying to see if we can engage Sam Houston in. Now, let me explain the 2 documents. We are producing, this particular study was on one section of town in the South. And it was focusing in on the 6 categories: public health, public education, public safety, housing, and economics, and one more. I can't think of what it was. but it's 6.
Environment?
Environment. Okay, now the undergirding component is public policy. Okay, that's what's going to stabilize or destabilize. Do you think we can create a document like this with Sam Houston as part of our partnership that we're trying to figure out what we're going to do? We haven't done it yet. We're just trying to figure it out. I want to be clear, whoever the president is of Sam Houston, they haven't committed you yet. We're on our way, though. Provost and everybody else. Now, this particular, now that's one document that we created. This is the comprehensive, this is the assessment, I mean. This document is that I provided them with a host of existing research on all of these disparities, inequities, because the premise that I presented was we don't need any more studies. What we need are vehicles, action items that deal with funding and sustainable application and co-creation by the university and the community. So this was an assessment of existing local research from the city, the county, the state, and some foundations. And the assessment is that my conversation or question was accurate. There needs to be no more studies because the comparison of what they did to versus what we did, same. So now the question is, how do we apply it? How do we go to a next step? But this is for the south side. We want to be able to do one on the north side, which in our sense, you are on the north side.
Yeah.
So just kind of let that kind of settle on you a minute. But I know you have this program that's cross-discipline community engagement, right?
Center for Community Engagement.
Center for Community. Talk about that one a little bit. In regards to engagement in the community.
Yeah, what it is, Charles, it is a center that facilitates a connection between community partners that need certain things done in a community or have a particular need. So let's say, community would like somebody to talk about disaster preparedness in the elderly homes. And then the community partner goes to the center, and the center tries to identify which professor at the university and which college has that particular interest, right? So would be dealing either with the elderly or disasters, or there could be many angles there. And so what we are trying to do is to match the faculty with a community partner that requested some type of project, and it's becoming part of what's called academic community engagement designation of a course. So if faculty teaches a course, then in itself has an element of 9 hours of students having to work in some capacity in a community setting, and then weave it into the class project or class content, concepts, theory, and things like that. And there are outcomes that have to be, clearly beneficial to the community partner, not just the student getting the experience of experiential learning that you're talking about. That's where this reciprocity comes in. And the important thing that Sam Houston has done, which I think for us it's been a very good model, is that every college there is a coordinator or liaison to that center. And this is a person that knows which faculty is more interested in that action research than others, or what their interests are, and they can sort of serve as a linking pins. And so, then the faculty that has this applied research interest can then be matched with a community partner. So that's what we are doing at our university. And we have, the center has been around for 5 years. We have grown those what's called academic community engagement courses. And you asked me also about, how students translate some practical stuff they are getting in the academia into the resumes. And those projects, academic community engagement projects, are sort of those tangible tidbits on the resume. So it's not about, finishing that particular class or having this GPA, but actually being able to say that they have assisted with developing a security survey for this elderly home. You know, so that's what we do at the university, and we do have that. The mission of Sam Houston State is the measure of a life is its service, and you know, it's a beautiful mission. So we are trying to institutionalize it, that community engagement learning across all different colleges, and you know, we've got 8 of them.
So let me ask you a question that some may interpret as putting you on the spot.
Bring it on.
Now, you know, you get the emails when I send out to the different universities, and it's time for us to have and this is spontaneous with me asking, because I was thinking about it the day before yesterday, when would we do it and where would we do it? Are you all capable of having a hosting, not the mixer size group that we had on October the 3rd? That was kind of like an introduction to what I was trying to communicate. But we need to get on these committees. There's 4 committees. You know, I mentioned one of them to you for the conference. But so if we had about 11, 12 people from the different participating universities, could we do a workshop at your place with that 10 or 12 with like Prairie View, TSU, Texas A&M, HCC folk that's participating?
Well, you're not putting me on the spot, actually, because we have done initiatives like that. And actually, we had, for a couple years now, we have what's called the Gathering.
The Gathering?
The Gathering, yes.
You mean like the Halloween? Whoa, now wait a minute, that's kind of deep.
So we have, a couple years ago, we spearheaded that at SAM, and we invited those universities in Texas that had some type of civic engagement component, that either had it, you know, and we knew about it, or they advertised it, and they came in to talk about community engagement and how, you know, different universities conceptualize it and how they work with communities and how they do things like you ask credentialing courses specifically to designate that they are community engaged, or, you know, service learning. There are different names for that. And we had about 30 or so people that came in. And last year, the Gathering moved to Arlington, University of Texas at Arlington, and this year is hosted by, I believe, University of Houston downtown. So we do have a nice working group of universities that have community engagement mission. And I'm saying that because I believe that positions us to be very receptive to, you know, having a continued discussion on us doing that.
So I'm gonna take that as a yes, and I'm still in the ballpark. So I didn't make a request outside of the ballpark. I'm in reach, okay. So what I'll do today, tomorrow, is I'll reach out to some of those universities to see if that's center point, you know, we can make it ground zero, and see if they'll check off on it, and then I'll try to get with you on a date to see what's good for you to host that type, because at some point before January 2018, I want to try to make sure that we all understand the concept. Even though we have a different premise, we still have a same or similar objective, but once we understand where we are, we can function better. You know, we don't have we understand the process from that standpoint. So that's the idea of this little gathering, a smaller version, for this particular project of the mixer. Okay, so what would you say, Professor, on the aspect of, and we're getting into the time of like a wrap up.
You're telling me to keep it short, then.
Yes. But as a wrap up for the audience, in disaster capitalism, disaster inequities, and what would you suggest to the audience as far as research material or something for them to go further in their search for understanding this big thing that's dealing with policy and disaster and what they should know to be prepared, and I'm not talking about for the actual event, but be prepared when they go to these meetings by the city or the county. How should they prepare?
Well, I mean, that's a hard question to answer, so I'm going to answer it in a different way
Okay.
than you're expecting. I was struck by what you said when you brought these two documents out, saying that the research being done in the community, the research being done in the university level, it's the same, right? They're finding the same things. We don't need any more research, right?
Right.
I agree. However, we are doing research. So we have a NSF, a federally funded grant to study Hurricane Harvey that's particularly focused on the issues you're bringing up. And we were funded because the promise that we made with this research was that we are going to turn an eye to the people who are responsible, which is the government, and to the institutions, and say, we're working with the communities affected by the hurricane to say, this is what the problem is from our perspective. And this is what you need to do, what we think you need to do to fix these problems. And so we have a large voice. And our intent, and I'm speaking for Dr. Dennis.
Certainly.
You can disagree with me if you want, is to take everybody's voice who's been affected and turn the lens to the government themselves so they can actually, we have evidence saying, this is science saying, y'all need to do something.
Now that's perfect, because our research focused on service
Right.
and the service gaps.
Right.
It didn't focus on what you just said. So that is a powerful, powerful tool and adaptation to go with the service component.
Right.
Because we are saying to the government, we are not the enemy.
Exactly.
You have made us a victim
Exactly.
and the enemy and a scapegoat all in one. All we're asking for is the same thing that your existing policy says that you're going to provide to and for us because we pay taxes.
Right.
That's all.
Yes.
That's yeah.
And that is something that has to be said and is not said yet.
Which is the same thing Jim Blackburn said, is that this discussion is not in the public domain, and it should be.
It's not in the domain of disaster research. It's not in that domain. The state of scholarship in this area is, I'd say, 20 years behind. So what the good thing is that we were funded to bring that to light, and that's what we intend on.
Who funded you?
The National Science Foundation.
Let's give them a hand. I mean, I'm gonna write them a letter, thank you, to say y'all did one thing right.
Well, there are powerful people in the system who get it, and the key to capitalizing on those relationships is to provide evidence to them, so they can take it to the government and say, look, we funded this, we put our money into this. This is what we found. Y'all need to listen.
Okay, so that gives us a track.
Yep. Legitimacy.
It's all them words. That's why we go.
It gives us the research, the science behind this makes it gives it credibility. It's not just people complaining. It's not people.
Right. It's not the
Right.
emotional.
Right.
It doesn't matter. They don't know what that's.
Exactly.
So that's a match. That's a
Yep.
clear match.
Right.
And it encourages me that I'm still in the ballpark. I just don't want to get outside on the parking
No,
lot.
you're-
I want to be inside the
you're right in
ballpark.
there.
And see, here's the beauty of partnerships. See how you would say it versus how I would say it, or how you would say it. See, we're going to have to pick whose time it is to say, because I know when I may not be the best person to say it.
Me too.
Okay.
Most of the time.
Yeah, okay. So, Doc, give us your closing remarks on what we are trying to put together with these different universities and the community as to closing that service gap. You know, in education, they call it the achievement gap, but the achievement gap been growing ever since 40 years ago. So we need to have some kind of coordinated effort to close the service based on fact-based research and community advocacy based on those facts.
Well, Charlie, I think that the service learning has been a concept that we have had around since at least 90s. And you mentioned the millennials. They are probably the most serviced generation, you know, and involved and engaged generations. And I think, as Dr. Baker said here, we have a lot of those different things happening, and I think the important thing is to bring it together. Because you have, you know, those working groups like universities, engaged universities. You are doing your work with a community, and I think that there is, just like there is a lot of lessons learned and mitigation plans that have been written, we need to sort of put them all together, and the researchers, the practitioners, and people in a community sort of have to tighten it, weave it all together.
Yes.
I think a lot of stuff is there. I think Harvey, for us, in this part of the world, created the opportunity to have a very re-energized discussion and hopefully use this, you know, for policy window. You know, there is a public outcry about something, there is a very strong research need, so the academia is waiting for products, and there is a political will because of the outrage, and there is some media exposure, and I think there is this policy window where everything converges, and you've got this, you know, bullseye, and I think that's where we are in Texas, and so we need to monopolize on it, and we are, and we're really looking forward to our research as well.
Okay, so in closing, I want to thank both of you and the university, and let the provost know we didn't commit them to do anything yet. We're not costing any money yet, you know, so we all on good ground. Okay, we want to thank everyone from Sam Houston for working with us, even meeting your other group, the Community Engagement
Dr. Lee
Center.
and Dr. McCauley.
And I look forward to seeing Dr. Lee again, because she's a character. But anyway, I think she's a character, I don't know. But
And she's done, Charlie, she's done this, a community capital assessment. You're talking about social capital in a community. In Walker County, Dr. Lee has done work on Walker County post Katrina Rita.
Oh, wow. So just for the audience, this is Community Views and Solutions. The host is Charles X. White, and the host organization is Charity Productions. We want to convey to you that we are looking and expressing solutions and theories and lessons learned, modeling programs like community participatory research, bottom up, top down. Everything that we are saying is proven. There's a formula for everything. The question is, does the public know the formula and have the collaboration components to produce a vehicle to apply the solutions? We hope that we will be providing you the vehicle, the fact-based research, and the public policy amendments and recommendations that go with it. We need you to do your job when we ask you to advocate. Now, we are having a series in 2018, And the series in 2018 will be a series across the city of Houston. And there will be tabletop training sessions. We're also having a 5-series symposium on mitigation. And this introduction, these 3 programs that we have done, and maybe one more, will be our introduction to the Mitigation Symposium series. It's going to be held at 5 different locations. We already have one, which is Texas A&M. And you turning your head, because you know I'm turning my head looking at you, that you know we might try to come back, tell the president we might be coming back over there to hold one over. We're going to have 5 symposiums on mitigation. And we're going to have a community field, all-hazard field exercise. Charity Productions has been providing those in different neighborhoods for the last 15 years across the city. And then we plan on having a community conference, working together, revisited in September of 2018. So we do have a series of events that we are planning and to keep you informed and to keep you engaged. We want to thank the professors from Texas A&M that was with us this morning, and Tracy, who is the professional guy. And we do have...
Sam Houston, Charlie.
What did I say?
Texas A&M.
Yeah.
They were here.
Yeah, they're early.
Oh, that's right.
Yeah, they were here earlier. Oh, I thought I made you a satellite. I didn't mean to make you a satellite. I do promote people. But anyway, we want to say thank you for visiting with us. We hope we share some information with us. And if you need to call me, 713-292-3436. Charles X. White, your host. We'll see you next time. Mark, can you take us out of here?